There you go.
Good evening. Tonight is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and I'm calling to order the Committee of the Whole for the City of Gahanna. The agenda is under Section B of the agenda, Ordinance Number 62-2022, related to the development agreement for the Crescent at Central Park. Director Strum.
Thank you, Councilwoman. With me this evening, I have the team from Casto, Canini, as well as our council here. Brent, Larry, and Aaron and I have spoken a few different times, and I want to thank them again. As I think the members of the council know, my department's been a little short-staffed here lately, so they've been able to help me get some of this, at least the initial preliminary numbers, kind of wrapped up in some of this, and then we've been able to do some of our economic analysis based upon that. Before you this evening, I was asked by members of council two different things. The first was doing an economic analysis, full detail of the SIB and debt service implications of the TIF, which you see as part of an ROI Crescent update labeled 11/14/2022. And as part of that as well, I included baseline NCA, or New Community Authority projections, as part of the full build out on that. So you actually see that line item has now been inserted as part of line 31 in all of the principal ROIs, as well as in the debt service schedule, including the NCA inclusion. So to that, I'll open up the floor to members of council for any questions you might have about what my office prepared, as well as any additional questions you might have of the development team as it relates to their development agreement.
I think before maybe we get into direct questions from council members, Director Strom, if it's okay with you, would you go over the tables that you generated, particularly helping us compare
Sure.
the prior development agreement that was passed about 18 months ago to your midline, perhaps? Maybe we'll start there.
Sure. And so the original, actually, Kevin, can I have you pivot on me, my friend? What Councilwoman Bowers just requested is actually not in this table. It's a separate agreement that's under Legistar. So if you go into the original Legistar listing for this project, you can see the original, what I call the OG assessment of the project. Don't judge me, gentlemen.
Is it attached to this item here?
It's attached to the Legistar item. It should be a Crescent original. I can check on my math over here, make sure I'm giving you the right name on it.
Should be number 12. Number 12, yeah, thank you.
Because there's a lot of attachments tied to this project right now.
We believe it's number 12.
Yes, I would believe it is also number 12. So in the original assessment that my office did, and again, I can't necessarily speak to the full ins and outs of that original project. I wasn't here. But my best guess, what I was able to do is go back and take a look at the various elements of the project, which included some general estimates around hotel, event, medical, multifamily, and commercial. I'm going to look at the total project ROI, Kevin, if that's the number, if that's the type you can look at, and can you zoom in on that one so that no one's killing themselves to read that? When we originally projected this, those summarizations include the commercial, the multifamily, which I've remained blank through all this. I would like to contend that although I'm leaving the multifamily from a job standpoint empty, I think it's disingenuous of us to not acknowledge, regardless if it's this original project or the current project that we're evaluating, that we will see some work from home variance in there. We're just not capturing it at this point because I don't want to add a new wrinkle to this process, quite frankly, that I don't have a full estimation or understanding of. But the ROI here shows the inclusion of jobs associated with the commercial areas, the multifamily, the original medical, which is a smaller scale. I think it was about a 4.5 acre development proposed, and then the hotel and event center. And that scaled out over the 30-year period. Again, we're looking at a 30-year window here only because of the TIF. That TIF extends beyond traditional cycles, but certainly could break some of that information out. Based upon my initial projections on estimated TIF estimates, job creation, payroll taxes, on that principal form, you see a ROI of about 5%. And that also includes the bed tax inclusion. So that bed tax calculation, I think we included a number in here. If you scroll over to the hotel and event center ROI, Kevin. And for those who haven't read through all of this, you see some of the inclusion and notes in the document of the estimated job numbers and where we're pulling that from as it relates to BLS, number of overall jobs, average wages in accommodations, sous chefs, cooks, things of that nature from a restaurant and utilities, hospitality standpoint. And then as well as estimating, I believe, we focused on $150 a night for 125 rooms with a 75% occupancy for 365 days a year at a 6% number there, and then pulling it up for 30 days. So that's where that estimation comes in at the projected valuation on some of the bed tax as well. So that's how that all folded together. I hope I haven't thrown a lot at you. or create a scrambled egg awkward omelet of a project summary from a year and a half ago at this point. In looking at the current projections, to the councilwoman's request, I'll start at the midpoint. So we had a medium valuation, and so what you're seeing in this evaluation, if we can go back to the updated, Kevin, yep. Scroll down to there's a medium total ROI. Thank you, sir. So in this, you see some deductions. So we included some valuations in this. I actually asked the team from Casto, Griffin, I think is here in the audience. Hey, buddy. To help reduce some of that estimations. I included that as part of the summarization to you as well this evening. I'm pulling up the exact number that we had it reduced by, so bear with me 1 second. So in the mid, we focused on basing the office value at $350,000 a year. So that was part of the request, was to see how this kind of lays out as it relates to the various tiers within the development group or the development agreement. Nothing else changed. So the office user remains the same in this model. Or excuse me, the office user changes. The commercial, the residential, which is still no job creation numbers, and the fueling center remain constant from prior iterations. What you see is about 100% return on investment. So for every $1 public incentivization you're getting into the project, you're getting $2 out of it, if you look at the summary on the bottom. And that includes your NCA dollars, which remain constant. A $5 million on a property today is worth a $5 million of property tomorrow. The one thing you will note as part of the scheduled out debt service, I do not have escalators in there. I know Casto has yelled at me before as part of this modeling. They wish to have escalators in there because that's realistic valuation. Not knowing where those escalators are going to kick in or what that percentage could look like, I chose to do a flat analysis. I mean, I think that came up in one of our early conversations around here, as if it jumped 10 mils or 15 mils, what does that do for the analysis? And quite frankly, it would increase the TIF. It would have a ramification during the tax abatement process, but I don't want to speculate on that. I'm showing the numbers as I know them to be today, and when I can spread it out. This gives you the low end of the spectrum. It's not going to give you the high end of the spectrum. As some of you, I'm sure, can appreciate, taxes rarely ever go down. They typically only go up. So I've now set the floor, not the ceiling, as part of the analysis. If you go to the next table, Kevin, this should be the TIF Pilots Gahanna medium value. And I know that's a lot to look at, especially if you're watching from home. I apologize. What you're seeing in this analysis is what the basic premise of the development agreement is, which was council had asked Casto to come back to the table with a scaled development that if they didn't generate more than $350,000, they would reduce, by year 4, I believe it reduces their overall inclusion of private debt associated with the project to 1.4 from a 2.4 valuation. And so what you're seeing in this analysis is that inclusion of that. Based upon my runouts, and again, this is a live document. I believe I sent to council the Excel, so you can actually touch the cell, see where the dollars are flowing into, where the orientation is coming from. You can follow the dollars throughout the entire process. And in short, what I'm showing is even under this premise, using just TIF revenues, Casto's made whole on its 1.4 number in year 10, and the city pays off its SIB loan, a projected SIB loan in year 12, based upon TIF projections right now. Because again, the big difference in the modeling wasn't in the tax for the property, and the TIF wasn't implicated, it was the income tax. So that's why you're going to see that continued conversation here. What was the big impact on the median value was, if you go to the next tab, Kevin, that's the full revenue model for the city. So that includes projected income taxes, the school abatement. I know, Councilwoman Bowers, you asked me previously about some of the projections. So as a refresher on the school abatement process, we look at 50% of the the tax loss on the abatement, plus 50% of the wages during the abatement period, not to exceed the overall loss of the abatement. So in this instance, we project that the value of the abatement is about $12 million. So as long as we don't, that's our cap. We want to get to that number as close as we can, but we're under our agreement. It's a 50-50 split in those spaces. we would see annual contribution of $825,000 to the schools, scaling up to $984,000 over the course of the abatement period, equaling about 11-ish. I can do the quick summarization on that. I don't have it on that slide. $9,074,255.64 is the full calculation on that. What that really means is, following the abatement period, revenues start flowing through the site. As I mentioned a year earlier, we would have clearance in year 12 on our SIB, so the revenues generated from the TIF that aren't going towards SIB would come in year 12, which is 2035, which is 42,000, and then it's a continuation there through. All in, the city's projected in the median value of about 23 million capture over the 30-year lifespan of the project. That number goes up in the high model, and candidly, the high model as it's listed here is actually the model that we've been working with because we do have some certainties as it relates to the projected payrolls that are associated with this project of 38 million, and then the low shows a net out to the city of about 17 million and change. So I have a high level of confidence that the value of what the city will ultimately generate as part of this project being between obviously the 17 and the 38 million and change. I've thrown a lot at you. But again, I think what's important here is as you're looking at the Excel document, you can actually see where the numbers kind of flow in and out of the project and how they're being captured and calculated.
Council, if I may, just to kind of remind everybody, when I first got involved with the project, that of course was pre-COVID, pre-administration, Tom Nealon's administration, Anthony Jones. I had taken, I think, matter of fact, I think Karen, you were there, Nancy, you came. We did a road trip up to New Albany, and I provided a sense of what my vision was for the project. And at the time, the project in New Albany included an event center, senior housing, hotels, gas, I think some fast food as well. So that was initially the model. Since that time, the evolution of COVID and where we are today, I think we saw a couple things happen on the hotel side of things with the airport getting involved with doing hotels on site. Mm-hmm. What used to be, and I want to remember the name, Don Kenny built the Concourse, I think it was called, was kind of a full-service hotel. That got demolished, if you remember, and got replaced with a Hampton and then I think a Hilton Garden Inn and one more. So that tended, that all kind of occurred while we were still in the concept stage of what we were going to do with the site. Add into that what's happened at Easton with the amount of hotels at Easton now too that have come to market. So I'm not saying that that's not going to be an opportunity for us, but I think what we've come to find, again, with the success we've had on Buckles Court North, with the amount of medical that's come our way, and the fact that we've sold out of all of that abated ground there, we definitely see it bleeding over to this site. So not only with this particular user we've talked about, but we foresee it happening with one or two more. But we will make efforts for a hotel if it can work. I think one of the things everybody has to understand too now is we're dealing with the flight path because we are in what's called the glide path, and so of the north runway. So because our medical users want that freeway visibility, that kind of pushes what could be a hotel site under the flight path. So that creates a dilemma for us there. Of course, that won't work because of the multi-story, where the medical is going to be at most 3 stories. Generally 2, but we might see a 3-story building. So again, I think the whole gist of this is just understanding where we see the project going now because of the success we've had with the medical. And we still foresee some retail working, and we've always committed to that. But again, I just want to remind everybody kind of where we started, what picture we showed you in the beginning way back when, and how things have changed with COVID. Same with the event center. I mean, we've revisited that, but honestly, I think we can all understand that an event center isn't going to generate the kind of income tax, nor will a hotel for that matter, compared to what we're talking about bringing in here now. And the event centers generally do. They sit empty most of the time other than when there's an event, and then you have people catering from somewhere else bringing the food. So I think we're headed in the right direction. And again, just wanted to kind of refresh everybody's memory of where we started and where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Canini. Mr. Strum, just for clarification purposes, and everyone else up here may already understand this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So looking at the total project ROI high, since that's the one that you said you're kind of leaning on, just to make sure I understand. So when I'm looking at the bottom lines 39 and 40,
Yes.
so going, the yellow, the 21 million is kind of financial outlay or financial obligation from the city.
Yes.
And that is the 11,646,000 that would
In the school compensation
go.
calculations, yes,
Yep,
ma'am.
in the school compensation.
The loss, that includes the loss of the city, that, the property value that would have gone to the city as part of our own taxation policy, and then the inclusion of the TIF reimbursement amount. Now, I'm calculating the TIF reimbursement amount at 4.569. The current development agreement shows for a number of 4.4 million, but I'm calculating it to include capitalized interest and some of the gap follow that's going to be in that first year, where we're not going to even have any dollars flowing in to cover the initial interest payment on the SIB. So I'm actually flowing that to Casto off of one before we even have the NCA kind of kick on, if that makes sense.
Okay. But then going into line 39, total investment to city, the estimated 57 million,
Yes,
you've included,
absolutely.
you've included the NCA.
The NCA's in that number, the TIF pilot arrangement, so those are the pilot payments that are associated with the TIF over the lifetime of the project. The construction income tax, that we'll have contractors providing income tax to us, as well as the total payroll tax as calculated up in line 7, H7.
Can you explain, I think I can understand sort of where the risk might fall with the payroll projection.
Sure.
Could you explain to me, and I think I also understand the construction income tax number, and probably don't need that explained in terms of risk to that number.
Sure.
Could you explain the where or the degree of risk in the calculated NCA projection and the TIF pilot payments?
Sure.
Thank you.
So in the NCA is it's a 5 mil assertion. So if you actually go through, I think I have in there should be a live link. Bear with me one second when I pull it up. So the way I actually calculated the NCA was taking the estimated improved value of the property, divide it times 35%, so there's a 35% reduction based upon calculated rates from the auditor's office, at 5 mils divided by 1,000, which is so the mils of 1,000 valuation down, times 30 years. So I took that value and sum it out on each of the different phases. So if we're talking about, in this instance, a future value of 12.538 million, that 1235 is then reduced by 35% at 5 mils divided by 1,000 times 30, if that makes sense, Councilwoman. And that's done repeatedly. I went online and went to the auditor's office.
What's the reduction factor?
35%,
You're reducing it by 35%?
down to 35%, so I'm multiplying it,
By 0.35?
yes.
Okay.
So I'm reducing it by 65%.
So the risk in that number is if the property value is not what you're projecting? Am I
Correct.
understanding that correctly?
Correct. So in this instance, I'm saying that a Class A office space for modern medical will not assess at 12.5 million, when in reality, if you look at the comps, there's a comp value in here, which is where we're pulling all our numbers from, property tax compensation. We used our comps of 700 Morrison Road for a similar size building. And actually, we are $2,300,000 less than what that current building is currently on the appraised for. So we're actually undervaluing the property today.
Which, on the reverse though, if
We're being
we,
conservative on the valuation.
yeah,
my point.
but if we drove up that valuation, we would drive up our school compensation amount.
Yes,
Right, okay. So they offset a little bit?
they do.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
then-
I'll happily throw in a $20 million valuation there if it helps everyone, but I just don't think it's realistic.
No, just making sure I kind of understand.
You're right, you're right there.
Okay.
And then, what was the other question?
The TIF pilot, like what's the risk also to that number?
So again, that's generated focusing on the estimated annual tax generated by what will ultimately be the new valuation. So again, assuming that the value of that building is 12.5 million, which we've already established that we're undervaluing based upon the comp model in the marketplace today. We're estimating that estimated annual tax is $416,314. The math is actually on the medical high ROI high. So if you want to see how I pull together those numbers, I'm taking the valuation of the 41634 times 20%, which is the non-abated value, taking that by 10 years. So that gives me 832,000 and change. Thank you, Kevin. So if you scroll down, you actually see how the soup is made. Right there. And so you take the non-abated value, and then they do the post. I mean, it's straight percentage with school versus non-school. So in a non-school TIF, all taxes that aren't related to the school are then TIF'd. So in this instance, 61.75% of taxable values are then TIF'd into the degree. 38.2% is, flip that. 61 is given back to the schools. 38.25 is captured by the city as part of the non-school TIF revenue, which is where that calculation comes from, Councilwoman. So you combine the 20% for the first 10 and the last 20. And it's a straight percentage.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And that's been consistent throughout the other modeling as well. So the math is on that spreadsheet.
All right. I'll open it to discussion and questions from council members. Yes, Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have a handful of questions that can be lumped into three broad categories: questions about the model, questions about the contract, and then I do have a legal question of the city attorney that I'll ask at the end. But first, let me say I appreciate everybody in here, the effort and time put forth revising this. I think for me, I'll speak for myself anyway, we're much closer to a deal than we were when this first came back a few weeks ago. Nate, forgive me, I think we received an email 4 o'clock-ish with the monster spreadsheet that you have here.
With the 1,000-tab sheet, yes, sir.
Yes, and the macros connecting all this. So I haven't figured it all out, so I'm hoping you can help get
Sure.
the curve here. So I have some hard copies of the total project ROI. As you know, there's a low, a medium, and then a high version. My eye immediately goes to what's different about those assumptions. And I'm hoping you can help me understand. There's a section that's titled school compensation that is different on, I believe, all four of them. What's the driver for the difference?
Because under our compensation arrangement, the taxable value stays the same. So in any instance, we're assuming, bad word, but it's the truth, we're taking 50% of the abatement value and 50% of the income tax generated in each of the models.
Okay.
So in the low,
So it's the income tax.
it's the income tax that's making that as a variable shift.
Okay. Is there a so that was my suspicion, but what threw me off is that we have these medical office similar ROI calculations where it appears that the school compensation number is static for those. So is there another?
Bear with me 1 second. So you're saying the medical office feels static?
That same category or component titled school
3.3.
compensation for the medical office ROI high model,
Yeah,
medium?
it is static. Why is that static? Oh, I see why it's static. Is because the valuation of it, the total value of the abatement was greater than the actual income tax. I can rerun that if you'd like. But
Does it change the?
it should not, honestly, because I didn't
should
flow
say,
it backwards.
Does it materially change?
No.
I mean, we're still looking at, almost 175% ROI if it's,
Yeah, you're going to be between 100 and 175, somewhere in that neighborhood overall from between the four projects. The number that really matters, Councilman, is in the the total revenue pages on the low, the medium, and the high, you can start seeing where those impacts of compensation generate different numbers. So your income tax projection in the low versus low at 229 to 388 during the
Sure.
taxation period or the CRA period.
It would probably make sense to put a finer point on those just, before we vote on it.
Absolutely.
I think,
Happy to do so.
But again, speaking for myself, I don't know that it's necessarily a decision breaker here. The next question I have is just regarding the contract itself. Obviously, we have what appears to be a blue line version now in our in our packets that replaces the red line version previously, and just kind of a clarifying question here. And Mr. Underhill, I know we had a back and forth at our last committee meeting where I asked if you guys were willing to commit to this end user that's really kind of driving the high ROI on these projects. And what has come back are these kind of various reimbursement scenarios. So I guess just for my own edification here, is that kind of your alternative to a contractual commitment to that end user is
Yes.
scaling it up based on sort of the income tax return?
Yes. Can you all hear me? Okay. Yes, we were hesitant, given, the nature of these negotiations with users of this type are, for various reasons, they're confidential. We're confident in the user, we're confident in the transaction itself, but rather than commit to that user, we thought tying it to a level of payroll was fairer. And I thought the point was well taken. If it doesn't happen, we shouldn't be, on this side of the table, get the benefit of it. So that was our attempt to say, well, even if that deal would fall through, which we don't believe it will, but there are other thresholds we could meet to get more compensation back for the road costs.
Okay. No, and I applaud you guys for coming back with an alternative there. I think it's a good model, generally speaking, that maybe would make sense in other projects as well, so thank you for that. The other question I have with regard to the contract itself, there's another change from the agreement that's sort of in place now, and that's changing the, for lack of a better word, the penalty rate that the city would pay you all from 4% to 4.5%. I certainly understand rates have gone up since April of 2021, but this kind of locks us in for, sounds like, approximately a decade's worth of reimbursement. Is there any opposition to a floating rate in case rates were to go down?
I'll defer to Brent here.
Floating rate.
Okay. We can talk to Nate about what might be appropriate there. And then the last question from me, Madam Chair, is for the city attorney. Ray, we had a very brief back and forth. One of the concerns that I had expressed was just whether or not the city's obligation or liability, if you will, was capped or limited. I believe you said that your view was that it was, but nonetheless, for the record, if you wanted to expand on that.
Yes, I would. If you look at sections 4, when you go to 4.A, B, and C, those were the ones you were just referring to, how they have different levels. And so at each different level, depending on how much income was generated, it would be capped at a certain amount. If you look at 4A, right in the middle, it says the reimbursement shall not exceed. And that's where I believe it states that it's being capped at that amount. It says so in B and C as well. And like you said, we're capped at different levels depending on what the amount of the income is at I think it's 4 years down the road, if I remember correctly. Yeah, fourth full calendar year.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further from me, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schnetzer. Other discussion items, questions? Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everybody, for all of the work and information. I guess just generally speaking, could you state for the record how you reached the low threshold, what benchmarks you were using to hit each of those categories?
So in the analysis, the high was the baseline that we've been working off of based upon the assumptions and things that have been shared to us previously. The median was based on a threshold of about $350,000 in income taxes. The low was a $225,000 income tax, and then the low was the $175,000. So backing out of that from an annual return standpoint. And that was based upon the thresholds provided in the agreement, as well as I Griffin had shared in an email from Councilman Snesser about 175. What happens if that were to hit? Like, how big of a ramification would that really have in the model? And so that's why those values were determined.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mrs. McGregor?
When you have the pilot or the TIF, it's 30-year TIF,
Yes, ma'am.
is that 30 years, like, no matter when the building begins? Or if there's like a building 5 years into the TIF period, does then that go 30 years from there, or is it just 30 years?
My understanding with TIFs has always been, I don't think this is a rolling TIF. I believe this is a established TIF district.
Okay,
So it would be beginning of construction is when the process begins, and then I think the model shows TIF values coming in either in year 2 for the fueling station, and then year 3 for the balance of the site. So it wouldn't, you're not going to have an extra 2 years on the backside, I think is where you're going
Okay,
with
that
this. It's a straight 30.
okay, can I ask another one? And I know, I was reading, hang on, it went away. Mr. Lascotti's letter about the floodplain. And it says that they're doing the calculations and stuff, which I know are complicated in dealing with FEMA, which I've done before, so it's a lot of work. And it says it will be sent to the floodplain administrator. And I would be okay with this as long as, then when all these calculations come to the city would hire somebody to help the floodplain administrator understand the data. And so somebody neutral to have, because this is a lot of complicated stuff, and maybe I'm going on what a prior floodplain administrator's qualifications were, but I'm hesitant to think that they can totally understand all of this.
If I could, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I can speak to that, and our Director of Engineering, Tom Comlank, is here as well. Mr. Comlank will be serving as our floodplain administrator, and for the time being, and we actually had this discussion. I know FEMA reviews this. We also have an outside consulting firm that we have been using. So I don't know, Director Comlank, is there anything that you would want to add as to how you would see, I don't want to speak for you, but I know we've had this discussion as to how.
And I just know they're very busy,
How
so
this would play
I
out.
don't want them to be overloaded with a lot of stuff and to be able to do it in a timely manner to hire somebody to help you do that. Now, I'm not saying you're not qualified, I'm just saying that I would be comfortable if we had somebody help whoever's doing it, look at all the data, because I know it's a lot.
Yes, we are actually going out for pre-qualifications for consulting services, and as a part of that, we do have floodplain regulatory compliance as a part of those qualifications. So if the desire comes about, we'll have the capability from pulling from consultants to provide staff augmentation and assistance to our department.
Because, we have to look out for our interests. You guys look out for your interest, we look out for ours, and so I think that's the way you get a good agreement. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director.
No, that's it.
I had one last item I wanted to kind of bring up. I appreciate you all coming back, and thank you, Mr. Underhill, Mr. Kanini, Mr. Sobchak, and of course, Director Strum. Over the last several months, Director Strum has done a really great job to help us wrap our heads around the concept that incentives are tools to help us close gaps between what we as a community want to see and what the market will deliver. One of the identified gaps in Central Ohio is for attainable housing, or housing offered for working individuals who have income below the area median income. For Franklin County, that's $65,625 for a one-person family and $75,000 for a family of 2. Diverse housing stock is important. We've talked about that a number of times up here from the dais and had a number of presentations over the last several months on that issue. With this receiving incentives, I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to incorporate and bake in affordable housing into the development agreement. And I'd like to request at least 20% of units are set aside at 75% of AMI.
Could we do 10% at 80 and 10% at 100?
I mean, if that's the best that Casto can do, I just would like to see some level of commitment to affordable housing.
Without having funding commitments beyond what we're talking about and talking to other sources, we couldn't commit beyond the 10 at 80 and 10 at 100. Can we potentially do better if we can get with some of our finance partners? Potentially.
Excellent, okay.
And we're willing to look into that, but here today, I can't say we can do better than the 10 at 80 and 10 at 100.
All right. Well, if you can, I guess, review that with, thank you, Mr. Schnetzer.
Just to add a little bit of, I guess, definitional context to that. So that 80 threshold that you have referenced, that's officially moderate income per at least the Community Reinvestment Act, which, without getting into the details, is a federal law that's overseen by either the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency or the Federal Reserve that requires banks to make, loans to certain lower income areas. And then the 100% threshold that you had referenced, I believe that will qualify as middle income. So just to the extent that it helps council understand what's being committed to here.
Thank you, Mr. Schnitzer. Yes, Mr. Malarski?
I've had a chance to go over this with Mr. Underhill, and there were a few changes that I've asked to be made, and so kind of could get lost in the shuffle. Since I asked for them, I at least wanted to point them out, so when you see this, the copy, you'll know that this is in there. In the second paragraph of Section 4, it talks about if the TIF does not have sufficient funds to pay the debt service on the SIB loan, then Casto is going to put an escrow amount equal to 1.25 times the amount of the annual debt service into an escrow account to make sure the debt service gets paid if this TIF is insufficient. It had previously said that this would be kept for up to the time when the TIF was able to support itself, and I asked for it to be changed to in the second consecutive year. So there has to be 2 consecutive years in which the TIF can pay for the debt service before it would be before this escrow amount would be returned. That was number 1. Number 2 was at the very end of paragraph or section 4. They had crossed out the section that said the city and the Crescent previously negotiated and agreed to certain terms. I believe that was crossed out because it was referring to an agreement with Crescent. After reviewing it, I asked that that be put back in because it does say that such costs shall not be included in the reimbursement cost. And so you'll see that that red line is now no longer redlined, that last paragraph before section 5. The next one is just, I felt was just a clarification. When it came to the NCA, it said the NCA was going to be 5 mills, and it could be increased to a maximum of 9 mills, but it said this increase in millage shall be permitted to apply to any real property until such time as a certificate of occupancy. I just asked that it said that any increase in millage above the 5 mills shall be that. So it just kind of clarifies it. It's what it said before, I think. I think it just clarified it because I was a little confused. Let's see. Down in section 8, we just extended the time in which the TIF legislation can be put into effect because this has been delayed and we're in the middle of November as it is, and it was the end of December. So we extended that to January. Since that time, just to let you know, a lot of this revolves around Buckles donating that 33 to 35 acres worth of property. Just Friday afternoon, I received those documents from Buckles' attorney. We're reviewing them. We've got one question about there's a discrepancy between 33.5 and 35 acres, and we're trying to figure that out. But once we get that done, then they'll be able to donate that as parkland to the city. And then that's when this is all going to kick in. That's when they're going to be able to contract with Buckles to get the rest of the property. So all this is going to be kind of pushed back, these dates. Upon our discussion, an email came through today asking that their date be pushed back, and I said that's fine as long as our TIF date gets pushed back. So just wanted you to be aware that those dates may change. And then finally, the last thing was right above Section 9, there's an A, B, C, D, and E. Again, I think is the same thing. They had removed, there's a section that says the city shall have timely performed all its obligations. There's a section right before that that was removed that said Crescent shall but it said Crescent and Casto, and I said, well, let's take out the Crescent part, but let's leave Casto shall timely perform all its obligations. Again, nothing major, just those were changed, and I know when you get these documents, it's going to be red and blue and taken in, put out, and I just didn't want those to slip through as to things that I was asked to be added. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Malarski. I guess just one follow-up question on some of that. The NCA cannot be reduced under 5 mils, is that correct?
The NCA can be up to 5 mils. There's going to be, an NCA is going to have a committee set up. I believe it's a committee of 7. 4 will be appointed by the city, 3 will be appointed by the developer, and they will set these rules. That will all be in the NCA agreement. So I can't speak exactly as to what that's going to say until the NCA agreement is made. But those determinations will all be made in the NCA agreement.
Ms. Bowers, if I may, I
Mr.
think
Rico.
when the legislation to create the NCA is passed, that there could be an agreement between the city and the NCA board once it's constituted, that we could make reference to in the NCA ordinance that maybe ties the hands of the NCA board for a period of some years to make sure that reduction does not happen, because you're obviously counting on that money. So I think there are ways to make sure that it doesn't get reduced, and ultimately, as Mr. Malarski said, you'll have the majority of the members on the board, and hopefully they'll follow your lead on that. But I think there are ways we can make sure that that doesn't happen, because you're counting on that money.
So yes, if there are things in the NCA you want to try to make sure is included, please let me know. I'll make sure.
Thank you. I'm not sure who this question is directed to, but I guess I am still a little confused on the development agreement as to whether the max millage for the NCA is 5 or 9, because it looks like it says,
It's 5 for the housing, 9 for the
Okay.
business.
Yeah, that's right. I think when we went
okay,
through this
thank you.
originally, that was, you wanted the ability to do more. We said as long as it's not on the multifamily, and I believe there might be a supermajority that needs to approve it from the board, but it could go up to 9.
okay, that's helpful, thank you.
I will clarify, the ROI that I calculated shows a 5 only, so
Across the whole project?
across the whole thing.
Okay,
So that additional wrinkle of a nuance, again, setting a floor, not a ceiling in that, the value will go up. It just won't go down.
and when would we expect the NCA legislation?
I'm sorry,
When
pardon
would
me.
we expect the NCA, the NCA legislation in terms of timeline?
Well, I think we could do that relatively quickly after we would get this approval, probably a couple, 3 weeks to get the documents together.
I was gonna say, we were 95% of the way there, and then this
Yeah,
thing
that's
got
right.
little yanked. Our in-house counsel from Frost Brown Todd had already pretty much buttoned that up, and then we put a pause on everything because of some of the things we've talked about previously as it relates to this project. So I'm very confident we can do a quick turnaround.
It would make sense to me to create that floor at 5 mils, since that's what we're relying on and talking about. I don't know how the rest of my colleagues feel about that, but that would make, yes, okay. That would make sense to me to see that in the NCA ordinance.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Canini?
Yeah, I would only, I don't want to hesitate, I'm comfortable with the 5 mils. What I would hope is that because we are bringing stakeholders of the community together, both city and private, to be on this board, and this being the first NCA that Gahanna's ever done, that will be expandable, by the way, beyond our project. That we look at, everybody be of the mindset that we're going to look at everything on a case-by-case basis from a standpoint of who that user is and what value they're bringing, to the project. So, I think we need to be careful when we start to talk about increasing that, because that is a millage that is something that, can concern some users, especially owner occupants, which is our goal here with medical users specifically, that we don't get too tax heavy on those people
Is
from
the
that
f-
standpoint. Because keep in mind, on top of that, you've also got, in a situation like this, you've got a common area maintenance fee that's going to go on top of, a lot of what else is going to happen around the project. So, just to be cognizant of that from a standpoint of, since we are all going to work together in this NCA board.
Yeah, I appreciate that point. I think just because, here we are looking at these numbers and using this to really make our decision from a taxpayer and use of tax dollar perspective. So is the 5 mills the concern across the project, or you're just suggesting that if we were to be heavy-handed with suggesting something over that?
Well, all the discussions I've had so far with users has been at 5.
Okay,
We have not spoken beyond that amount.
okay,
So it's just something that I think, again, once this board's created, that we look at it on a case-by-case basis with each user. And are we meeting quarterly? Are we meeting annually? Who knows? It's all going to be dependent on how successful we are. But again, remember, this NCA is expandable, and it's something that could move east, as we all know that we have goals to, see other portions of Gahanna along Taylor Road and so on. There are some parcels that could be absorbed into this NCA.
yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, thank you for that, Mr.
And
Kanini.
in fact, I think we would like to encourage others who are similarly situated, especially while we're trying to market our property, that they're going to be expected to pay the same, because we don't want someone to have an advantage in the market. That's good for you too, to require them to pay the 5 mills.
Yeah, okay. So a 5 mil threshold sounds like it's acceptable.
Yes.
Okay,
But again, from a board standpoint, we'll revisit it with
Yep.
each particular project, or each particular site, each particular user, because it's going to go beyond just this project.
yeah, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kanini. We appreciate all your work on this. Any other conversation this evening on this project? Mr. Renner?
Yeah, just to carry on, Mr. Kanini, as long as I've been on council, the Buckles track has always been a subject of what are we going to do? What are you going to do with this, right? And I was just trying to think, if there was an award for entrepreneurship or anything, the public, I appreciate my colleagues and I actually going through everything, and some of them have asked way deeper level questions than I ever would have, and I appreciate that from a public point of view. But I really want to just say thank you. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for the courage and going through and the patience of lasting through all of our questions. And most importantly, thank you for investing in Gahanna. If there was an award for complexity of a project, I think this probably be one of the very, very top. And I don't think the public has a really good, deep appreciation for that. Another part of our story that we're not telling, right? But we really should be out there really showcasing this. So thank you.
Mr. President, thank you. But again, I want to just remind everybody, it's been a true team effort. And I want to say that the latest team here, the organization here now, it's a joy to work with them. I can't specifically say I enjoyed the efforts from the previous administration, but this group, this council, this economic team, the mayor, everybody we all have a common goal now, and I think that was the key, and I don't think we all had that vision before, that common goal. So I just want to commend the entire administration. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Mrs. Angelou?
I'd like to say this, that I feel that we can trust you. And indeed, that's very, very important on something this big. So we're trusting you, and we hope that you can be successful in every way, because that will make our city successful. And I thank you for that.
Karen, thank you. And you've been one of my biggest cheerleaders, and I appreciate it. But I also want to just remind everybody that I think Casto has a much longer generational record than I do in Central Ohio, 3 generations, I think. And so beyond what my father and I had done in the past year in Gahanna, and we're very proud of what we've done. I think this whole team, including Aaron and I go way back. So I think we're excited about this project and really appreciate and look forward to your support.
Mr. Strum?
I was going to say, as a reminder, we'll work on having the updated agreement with the 10 and 10 inclusions as part of a final draft to have over to Mr. Malarski's office ASAP, and then have this up for vote at the next council meeting, if that makes sense to
Yes.
the body.
Thank you, Mr. Director Strum. So this has already gone through first reading, so it'll be on for second reading and vote at next week's council meeting. I will have to make an amendment to adopt it with the latest version, and so we'll work with Jeremy to make sure that we get that as cleanly as possible.
Add another attachment, Jeremy. I'm sorry, buddy.
And then, just as a reminder, just kind of a housekeeping reminder, Jeremy has done an excellent, Clerk Van Meter has done an excellent job at attaching signed contracts to our signed legislation and uploading those. So that is an important kind of piece of housekeeping that we'd like to kind of keep moving forward. So if you could, just a housekeeping reminder to make sure that Jeremy gets a final signed contract. Thank you.
I have one
Yes,
quick
Mr.
question.
Underhill?
What is council's pleasure in terms of, I hate to keep redlining a red line or a blue line or whatever it is now. We're running out of colors, but
Let's make it
would you like to see just changes to the clean document you have in front of you now? Will that be sufficient so there's not so much confusion? It's getting hard for me to even follow, so I just want to throw that out there.
I completely empathize with where you are. I would defer to Mr. Malarski or my colleagues. I think it's, what would you like to
What
see?
you guys would understand, what you guys want, so that you know what you're voting on. That's what's important, that you understand what you're voting on.
I do like that you date stamp the end of it so that we can specifically refer to that. I guess if you want to just work within the 11.2 version,
Okay.
I think that was the last draft the last blue line that we were working on today. So maybe just work in that and,
I could highlight in green or something, maybe over, I don't know, whatever, but I'll do my best.
thank you. That's why you get paid the big bucks, Mr. Underhill. Thank you.
A clean version would be appreciated.
I think the date is, if it has a date on it, then we could go back and look and see what was the closest to the current time.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Underhill.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You're stuck with us, Director Strum.
I'm built for a marathon.
The next item on the agenda, probably the next two items on the agenda, should be a lot quicker. Ordinance 70-2022 and Ordinance 71-2022. Director Strum?
Yes, so I believe that one is related to the tax increment finance, or excuse me, my brain's on TIF right now. Tax Incentive Review Commission, or TIRC. Annually, the city of Gahanna, through our TIRC appointments, reviews this as part of the county auditor's process for annual tax abatement reviews. That meeting was held prior to June 30. The minutes were just sent over to us by County Department of Economic and Community Development, at which point I wanted to turn them over to this body for adoption. As part of the submission here, I include the minutes from that meeting. Please don't judge me. I have a fairly decent rapport with members of the county's TIRC members, so you'll see a little bit of familiarity and some, I'm going to call jovial expressions throughout the minutes if you get a chance to read them, as well as the agenda and staff reports. Please note that those staff reports are generated at the state level, and those reports have already been filed per the state's compliance period of June 30. And this was a formality of the council body adopting the TIRC recommendations from the county as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Weaver, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, just a general comment. As many folks know, I do work for the county during my day job, and my colleagues spoke very highly of Director Strum and the City of Gahanna and its presentation with the TIRC, and in fact said that it was the best of the county of the presentations from municipalities. So kudos to Director Strum.
They're just fishing for a food and beverage tour.
Oh, we know that.
Of the City of Gahanna, because many of our incentives are related to food and beverage manufacturers and participants.
Just wanted to offer my praise and congratulations to Director Strum and the administration and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Any other questions? Mrs. McGregor?
As far as not specifically to this, but do they ever like, not approve what a company's done as far as incentives are?
Absolutely. So we review those, especially in the post-94 CRA. So I've only been doing this now here for 18 months, but before my joining of the city, I've actually declined 4 in my time for missive job applications, assessments, and things of that nature. So I can't speak to what Gahanna has done, but we certainly do keep the proverbial feet to the fire with our businesses to ensure that their obligations and what they say they're going to put forward end up actually occurring in those spaces.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
It's just fun to see all the food-related industry that we are housing in the southern end of Gahanna.
We have a very strong ecosystem.
We do.
All told.
We do. Very good. All right, consent? First reading, no need to come back. Consent? Okay. And the dissolution of the Kirk.
So yes, I'll ask for Director Burry to also join me up here just in case you have any other additional questions. But the real crux of this issue ends up being that we don't have any eligible properties for the utilization of the Kirk. And so the dissolution of it just allows for a board not to be under the jurisdiction of the city anymore at this point. I think that's a fair assessment.
Director Burry, do you have anything to add?
Nope, to see if you had any questions about it. It was based on old legislation back in 1978, I believe it was, creating the industrial zone. I believe that's before the incentives we have now
Yeah,
have been developed.
it's
So it's
fairly
all
archaic.
old. Yeah.
Any questions or discussion? All right.
Can I-
First, yes.
When did the last property roll off? It was a 30-year from whenever they got there.
2014.
Okay. I knew it wasn't too long ago. Okay.
Only 8 years. It only took us 8 years. All right, first reading, no need to come back. Consent? All right, very good. Thank you, Director Strom. Section C of the agenda, items from the Department of Parks and Rec. Resolution 33-2022, a resolution accepting state capital funding through Ohio Department of Natural Resources for renovation of the Price Roadhouse for recreation programming. Director Farrell.
Hello, thank you. As you know, there is a vacant residential home that is owned by the city of Gahanna. Due to its location, which is in close proximity to the Big One at Trail as well as the Big One at Creek, as well as being part of parkland, it is a opportunity to add some much-needed programmable space for recreational programs. With that, the administration submitted an application to state capital funding in order to really get this project over the finish line. Thankfully, the city was awarded $100,000 for the renovation of this project. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources is the host, but ultimately a pass-through for the state capital funding. With that, they retain $2,000 for administrative cost. So the administration is respectfully requesting the approval of $98,000 to be included into the city's budget.
Any questions or discussion? All right.
I have a question. Can I ask? I think it's worth saying that this property was acquired, I forget the year, but it was purchased for a private school, to be a school for a small church. And they purchased it for a price, and in a couple years, they realized it wasn't going to meet their needs. So they approached the city and said, we want to sell this to you because it has this great barn we think you could use, and it has a house, and we will take payment over 2 years. And at that time, we didn't have a whole lot of money. And so it was really it was a Southern family, and it was really nice that they did that because it allowed us to purchase that property with that barn that we could store so much. It had a heated barn on it, pole barn, and it was adjacent to Price Road and the southwest floodplain. So I just think it's worth saying that that was very nice of that family to do that.
The pole barn is still used. That's where we store our equipment for the summer.
What year was that? Nancy, what year was that?
Pardon?
What year was that?
I don't know what year.
In the 80s.
It was what?
In the 80s, if I remember correctly.
No. It was, since I've been on council, and that's in 2003, so it's
Okay.
been sometime since then.
Okay.
I'll have to look that up.
Well, congratulations, Director Farrell. Thank you so much for your work on behalf of the city in securing this grant. This is a huge win, I think, for us moving this project forward.
Great, thank you.
Consent agenda, first reading, no need to come back, or no, it doesn't need a first reading because it's a resolution, so just consent agenda? All right, wonderful. And Section D, items from the Department of Court Services, Ordinance 68-2022, and ordinance amending Gahanna Codified Ordinance Section 133.099 for Municipal Mayor's Court Special Projects Fund. Ms. Parker.
Point it up, I have to point it down. Well, first I'd like to bring to your attention and apologize for the inconvenience for a typographical error that was in the attachments. It refers to ordinance 1901.23. It should be 1901.26. So those amendments have been made and sent to Clerk Van Meter. But this is mostly housekeeping. Our ordinance no longer mirrors the ORC, and we'd like to bring it in line with that revised code. Current ordinance limits how much we can charge for the Special Projects Fund, which we call the Building Fund, and it also limits what we can use that fund for. So currently, it is no more than $5 per case, and it can only be used toward facilities, the rehabilitation or purchase of facilities. The ORC actually does not put a limit on the fee that can be charged, and it expands it from only the facilities, rehabilitation or purchase to include hiring and training of staff, community service programs, employment of magistrates, training of judges, other related services. So it's mostly housekeeping. It just puts us in line with the Ohio Revised Code and opens up the possibility for us to make some changes in the future if we should decide to do so.
Ms. Parker, when was 1901.26 adopted? Do you know, or when was that modified?
I don't know. I can find that out for you.
Yes, Mrs.
Been
McGregor.
Since I was on council. So I was on 2004 on, but I remember that we said that I was a proponent of the limiting the money because I really didn't have a use for it, and I was afraid that it would just become a slush fund.
Our ordinance was in 2005. It was passed in May of
Okay.
2005.
But I was
so
afraid it would just become, just money to just use for whatever. So we put some real tight restraints on it at that time.
And it may be, because I did look for the ordinance to see when the ordinance made the change to not have a limit on it, and it may be that there was never a limit on it in the ordinance. Maybe that's why I couldn't find it, because we self-imposed that in our ordinance as opposed to the
I remember
revised
that
code.
discussion, because it could have been, I think, $10 or something, but we kept it low because it really didn't have a purpose. It was kind of like a pie-in-the-sky reason. I'm like, why should we put all this money away and not be able to use it if we, so, okay.
Any other questions or discussion on this item? All right, so first reading, no need to come back. You will provide you've already provided an amended version, so at second reading, we'll need to do an amendment to adopt that corrected exhibit, or no?
No, it's, the typo's already been corrected on the legislation itself.
Okay.
It was just one number of the ORC code. And then her report has been updated and attached to the ordinance itself.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Excellent. So we don't need to do any kind of amendment or anything?
No.
All right, so consent, first reading, no need to come back, consent? Good? All right. Thank you. See, you took ownership for something that we totally wouldn't have noticed. Thanks. All right. Section E, items from the Department of Public Service. Ordinance 69-2022, an ordinance amending Gahanna Codified Ordinances, Title III, Public Utilities, Chapter 921, Sanitary Sewer Connections and Rental Rates, and Chapter 929, Water Connections and Rates, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. I'm Corey Weibensinger, Finance Manager. I'm here today to present the recommended annual modifications for 2023 and amend provisions on behalf of the Public Service Department and in conjunction with Interim Director Rob James. As part of the annual routine change request related to utility fees, Director James and I met to review and discuss rates associated with the city's Water Operations Fund, the Water Capital Funds, the Sanitary Sewer Operations Fund, the Sanitary Sewer Capital Fund, our Stormwater Fund, and our garbage and collection fees. Throughout these meetings, we discussed comprehensively the factors leading to our recommendations. In late October, the City of Columbus Department of Public Utilities announced that they are recommending in their 2023 budget to raise water and sewer rates by an aggregate of 4.5% for all its customers. This is the single largest factor in operational rate setting here at the City of Gahanna. Over the next few years, the City of Columbus projects that sewer rate increases will peak around 7% and water rates will peak around 6%. These anticipated rate increases are a result of many factors that include increased prices of materials and chemicals, meeting EPA requirements, and an increase in the debt repayment for capital projects. All of these increased costs by the City of Columbus directly impact the rates that we charge our users. In the early 2000s, the EPA issued a consent decree to Columbus, along with many other communities around the nation. Columbus immediately made a plan to address the EPA's orders, which allowed for them to take on gradual debt to make the required improvements, as opposed to significant unanticipated double-digit increases. To cover the City of Columbus's rate increases in internal operations here at the city, the administration is proposing a matching 4.5% increase. This equates to a 3% or 27 cents for every 1,000 gallons of water, and a 6% or a 52% or 52-cent increase for sanitary sewer, which would equate to a net of 4.5%. These increases are only associated with the operational costs, and no increases are being recommended for the water capital, the sanitary sewer capital, or the stormwater fund, as current fund balances and anticipated revenues and expenditures project sufficient funding levels for 23. Also included in our recommendation is an increase of 7 cents per ERU per month associated with the Columbus Consent Order, or CCO. This fee is a pass-through to the City of Columbus for EPA requirements for capital projects associated with separating sanitary and storm sewer. In total, the recommended rate increase equates to a $3.23 per month based on average consumption of 4,000 gallons. Myself, a family of 2 adults and 2 children, are roughly 3,000 gallons, which would equate to $2.44 per month increase for a family of that size. No increases are being recommended for garbage and collection rates in 23. The city is under contract until 2024. There is a contractual fuel surcharge that was applied in 2022 that will continue to be monitored for its necessity. Other sections required to be reported are identified through the summary or overview provided with no changes. These will be continued to be reviewed and reported annually. Also included in the administration's recommendation are minor language changes to adjust the title from Director of Public Service and Engineering to Director, language proposed with the City Attorney's guidance. The administration respectfully requests that this be passed under emergency to ensure its effectiveness as of January 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weibensinger. Any discussion or questions for the director? Or, excuse me, I just gave you a promotion for Mr. Weibensinger. Yes, Mrs. Padova.
If I may. So it says under the Columbus Consent Order, it specifically says this is passed through to Columbus and Gahanna does not keep any of this money. Is that for the sanitary, sewer, and water rates as well?
No. So the Columbus Consent Orders is specific to the EPA requirements for their capital improvement to their stormwater.
Okay. Thank you.
Just since you brought up the waste garbage collection, it's my recollection that we had an optional extension with the contract with local waste. Does that, I don't,
So we went into contract through '24. That wasn't any extension options. That was
Okay.
a transition from Rumpke to local waste, and we're still under that original contract. But there are extension options for this current contract.
that's what I meant. That's what I was asking, yeah. So there are extension options with the current
Correct.
contract. Okay.
Yeah, the current contract for the 3 years, there are no rate increases into the base rate.
Right, right, okay. All right. On for first reading, no need to come back, consent? Yes, okay, with emergency? All right,
Thank you.
all right, thank you. All right,
We adjourn?
we are adjourned. 5-minute break? No, bio break?
We can take 5.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm really, again, you have to trust
Good
this.
thumbs up there, Mr. Van Meter? Okay.
And it looks like it's.
All right, calling to order. Maybe. Calling to order Finance November 14th, 2022. We're missing one. Hey, Nancy.
Herding cats up here.
All right. Now, calling to order Finance Committee for November 14th, 2022. We just have one item on the budget, one item on the agenda, a discussion item for the fiscal year 2023 budget. Just a quick recap / housekeeping, as was mentioned during the presentation. Kind of our course of business here is council submits questions to me. I batch them, eliminate any duplicates, and then provide them to the administration for review. I have that list of questions in front of me. I believe it's been attached to our agenda online as well, so that anybody at home that wants to follow along. I was asked before the meeting if we could take them a bit out of order, so if anyone's starting at the top, just know that we're going to actually start at the bottom and then kind of work our way around here. Before I begin, is there any sort of comments from the administration? Anything? Just,
No,
if not, I'll dive right in, but if you have anything.
We can dive right in, but I do want to thank you, because I know it was with City Hall being closed on Friday, the ability to get the questions on time on Thursday so we can get started working on that was very important for us, so appreciate the process. It does work well for us because it gives us an opportunity to do some research and pull the information together that we can give you thorough and informed responses, so thank you.
Thank you for that. So the first one we're going to tackle is the question regarding the capital improvement fund, and I'll just simply read it off of the sheet. A total of $4.1 million is requested for streets. That appears to be $2 million for asphalt overlay and $2.1 million for what's labeled as rebuilds. At this annual run rate, how many years remain on the Detroit-style street rebuilds, and then how long until the city streets would reach the desired PCR level? So for reference, these are found in the budget book on pages 37 and 115. Okay, floor is yours.
Good evening. So as it relates to street rebuilds, concrete streets, we have about 6.5 centerline miles of street remaining for rebuilds. We're rebuilding approximately a mile annually, so with a present value of roughly $1.92 million for that 1 mile or slightly above. We're looking about 6-7 years to replace the balance of the concrete streets.
Okay.
And as it relates to the pavement rating within the 23 budget, we're looking at redoing our pavement management system and using newer technology, gaining some efficiencies through LiDAR, machine learning type equipment that drives the streets, rates the streets, and it provides a more objective review of our pavement. And from that, it'll give us the capability of scoring, putting metrics and KPIs around preservation of the pavements going forward. So we'll outline that once we get the vendor on board and go through the rating.
Okay. So that would replace the handheld device driving around the streets? Well,
Correct.
I guess having someone ride shotgun and put in the handheld device? Okay.
Correct. And I can relate to when I was here before, driving around with a piece of paper and handwriting that down, bringing it back, putting it into an Excel spreadsheet. So much more efficient.
Sure.
Yeah.
With regard to the question, it sounds like it's based regarding the PC, the pavement condition rating levels. It sounds like that's to be determined based on the
Correct.
the revised system.
Yes.
Okay. Anything from council on that particular topic or question?
I guess just is
Yeah, Ms. Bowers?
Thank you. Is the cost for the new system included in your proposed budget?
Yes, it is.
And will that reduce or free up staff time to work on
Correct.
other items?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anything further from council on this particular topic, Detroit-style streets or asphalt overlay? Okay, thanks you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So there's been a question that was previously asked, and I believe the administration is prepared for it, so I'm happy to include it here. I believe it is in regards to the topic of parks and pool maintenance. I'll either defer to the administration or I'll defer to a member of council that asked the question to kind of appropriately ask it.
Sure. I believe this question was asked last week when Director Burry presented the budget.
Okay.
And gave a summary in terms of what the capital expenditures were going to look like. And I believe it was Councilwoman Bowers who asked a question with regard to the pool maintenance number that was shown. And Madam Chair, if you want to clarify the question, but we're prepared to explain what that number looked like.
Thank you. Just supportive of continued pool maintenance. As an avid and frequent user of our Parks and Rec, I'm just supportive and encouraging of continued reinvestment in those structures. So interested in hearing more about what that number entails.
Sure. So the number that was displayed on the presentation from last week was a compilation of many maintenance programs. So clearly, there's a lot of assets within the Parks Division. Again, with over 700 acres of land and assets, there's a lot of upkeep that needs to happen. So those maintenance programs exist in order to help maintain those property. The pool infrastructure, the request is for $65,000. That request is to replace diving boards. There's also some replacement structures for competitive stands for our swim meets. And then there's also repairs to pumps for obviously the pump room. So that's the request for 2023, and that's something that will obviously continue to be a request because there's never going to be a time that we're just done fixing things at the pools.
Yeah, pumps and boilers seem to be a recurring item.
That's correct.
And just for reference, that can be found on page 115 of the capital maintenance and improvements in the budget book, the 65,000 figure that you were referencing.
Yes.
Yeah, Mrs. McGregor.
Can I ask, how long have we had the liner in the front pool of the Gahanna swim pool? And I know it's a 10-year life expectancy, I mean, maybe more, maybe a little bit less, but how long ago did we put that in?
It was installed in 2017. Like you said, there's a 10-year warranty. That is something, obviously with the Parks Master Plan, the understanding of we need to make a plan for that now. We can't wait for that 10 years to decide then. So that is in the forefront.
Okay, thank you.
I assume that'll be in the CIP that's forthcoming?
Yes.
Okay, lucky guess.
Yes.
Anything from council further with regard to pool infrastructure and maintenance? Okay, thank you so much. All right, just going to revert back to the top here. A lot of these are more operational in nature. Tried to categorize them by department or topic, so these next two fall under just sort of a catch-all of general government. And again, just reading the question, salaries and benefits request of the general fund is 10% more than in the prior year, 2022. The ask is to kind of deconstruct the components of this growth. How much in absolute dollars is being driven by the union contracted wages that we agreed to? How much is attributed to wages in the revised pay plan? How much is being driven by benefits? And then lastly, how much is new or reclassified positions within the city's organizational structure? And for reference, a lot of this can be found on page 49.
All right, I'm going to answer the cost questions and then we'll go into discussion. So I did put this together rather quickly. I am going to project it is on an Excel spreadsheet. However, I probably will refine it a little bit more before the next committee meeting. It's pretty easy to pull out and look at the union groups, but when it came to the unclassified, because we have had changes in 2022 during the year, so to try to capture that cost, plus the changes that we made to staffing during 2022 on that unclassified side was a little bit tricky. But it should give you a pretty good idea about
Okay.
where the majority of that is coming from.
Thank you.
There.
The numbers tie out.
Yeah, that was the hard part. So hopefully, yeah, that should be good there. So we're going to look at the, what did I do?
So close, Joey.
I know. Let's try that again. I meant to hit hide and I hit stop sharing. Okay. Now we'll start. So kind of what I did was looked at a couple things. So the FOP increase, this is related to the contract, and this includes the fringe benefits also. I know you guys wanted it broken out. That's the piece that I'll work on in getting that breakout a little bit clearer. But this is just showing as a whole what is basically driving that $1.7 million increase. So we have the union contracts, at the top is FOP, and then you'll see a little further down that we have the steelworkers here for the USW, and then we have the dispatchers, which is the OLC increases. So those three are your union increases. And then what we have for unclassified for the new compensation program is about 150 there, kind of in the middle. And then we have just some other general changes. So you'll see a net change to insurance, and that's because it's driven by more than just premium rates. It's also driven by level of coverage. So we automatically assume family coverage for those vacant positions, but then we also have coverage that changes during the year from beginning to end and then during open enrollment. We also had the changes for the two union groups that were negotiated in 2022 for the FOP and the dispatchers that do bring on the high deductible with the healthcare savings account. And it also puts them on a 4-tier level. Right now, the only information we have until we accumulate all the information from open enrollment is that they're either family or single, so going back to their old kind of threshold, still based on the new rates, but we don't have that breakout into the 4-tier. So that's why you'll see that insurance was kind of just pulled in as one total number, including all new employees and any changes to those premium levels until we can get open enrollment done. And that's one of the changes that we usually bring in at the end. So insurance is pulled out separate. And then you'll see where it has the additions. So that would be the new staff that are being requested. The new organization is related to the organizational change that you saw on the chart on page 10. And then we do have one increase you'll see for net uniform there towards the bottom. So that's just driven by higher rates or increases for purchasing those uniforms. And then you'll see kind of an all other. So that was just kind of balancing to that number. Again, we made a lot of changes in 2022 from what we had originally planned throughout the year based on staffing needs and hiring individuals. So where we may have potentially planned for a higher paid position, maybe reclassified that. There were some positions that didn't get filled. And then there was a change in allocation from 2022 to 2023. So that's just kind of the catch-all for capturing what the change is there at the bottom of their 1.7 million.
Thank you. Anything from council on that topic? And just a quick sort of point of reference here, this is specifically in regards to the general fund, which the next question deals with some of the special revenue funds.
Just as a follow-up.
Sure, Ms. Bowers?
Joanne, just so I am making sure I'm reading this correctly. So the third line there, add ADD, that's additional positions that are being requested. So the net new positions being proposed for 2023 is about $350,000.
Correct.
Okay, and can you go over what the new org line is again for me, that $250,000?
Yep. So on the page 10 where it shows the breakout of the new organizational chart, showing the Senior Director of Administrative Services, Senior Director of Operational Services, and then the Senior Deputy Director. So I did not include any of those in new positions. I wanted to pull those out separately as a change to the organization, since we kind of mentioned that and lay that out in the book, that is a change in org. And there's also one position that's currently existing. So this is just the net change for those organizational changes going on.
So that number includes the increase from Director of Administrative Services to Senior Director of Administrative Services. It also includes the Senior Director of Operational Services, and it includes the Senior Deputy Director.
Correct.
Okay.
And that will be all their associated benefits too. Again, next committee, I'll give that breakout that was requested, salaries versus fringe.
Got it. Okay. And so those are, and they're not duplicated in the ad.
Correct.
ADD number. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anything further from council on that? Joanne, can you go over again what the all other category was?
Right, so that was what I was ferociously working on over here, is trying to get balanced to what the overall change was. So again, when I pulled the union groups are kind of easy to pull out and segregate and get those totals. It was the unclassified side that I was having a little bit of trouble. I was trying to back into it once I had isolated kind of the knowns, those union groups, the new ads, and the new organizational changes, but it was extremely low.
Okay.
So I knew that there had to be something else in there, so kind of stepped back again, pulled out then the unclassified that are currently existing, and just looked at what their new rates would be based on the compensation program going into 2023. So then that was, well, then this must be everything else that's changed throughout the year based on allocation changes, potential changes in those that we hired, again, at the beginning of the year, maybe looking to more higher paid employees, and then finding that we could fill positions maybe with a lesser, or just leaving them remain vacant and using those funds for another purpose. So that's kind of just that catch-all of everything else that happened in the general fund, 22 compared to 23.
When you have this, I guess, polished a little bit more, would it be possible to just send it out to us via email?
Yep.
Maybe with just a couple sentence explanation or something, unless there's a reason council would like it to come back for discussion. I'm specifically referring to the numbers themselves.
Okay, could we have like a who is what, who is doing what?
Yeah, I mean, if you want it broken down to that level of detail, but everything is listed in there.
I know what everything's, and
But-
there's the Senior Director of Administrative Services, those are new items, or Senior Director of Operations. Seems like if we could just have like a
I can
conversation.
speak to that, Councilwoman, in the next question.
Yeah,
Yep.
conversation on how this is going to be working, and the people that are going to be doing it, because we don't really have that much touching to the people that are actually doing things. We just, kind of hope that everything is going well, and it usually does.
Is the ask for the names of the individuals? I mean, is it like, do you want to see the names on an org chart or something, so it helps to kind of explain?
Do you want the entire city, or what would you like? I can run a sheet out of our system, but I can't print it because the paper's like this big.
Is it just the new positions? Okay.
Just the new ones?
And those that don't have any. Could we know what those, I know there's some here.
Yeah, so if you look on the department narratives for each department, the new 2023 requests they're in there, but there's not names.
So the way I understand the question, it deviates a bit from what we're asking of Joanne here with regard to sort of the numbers, how they all feed into the year-over-year increase. But I believe there's an ask for maybe our next committee meeting that would help to shed some light on the revised org chart. It seems like there's some individuals that are moving around and perhaps moving up or wearing a couple of different hats. And so to the extent that it might help to understand who those individuals are, if we could just have names for just those. I don't think there's an ask for the entire city.
Sure, yes, I can do that.
And I think we've had changes, and we've had things from COVID through here that we kind of lose track, at least I have, as a council member of who's doing what when.
Sure, I'll put
And
together.
if not now, when, where?
Yeah, I'll put together the new org chart, and I think I know what you're asking for. So I will put something together and see if that's what you're looking for.
I appreciate that very much.
Thank you both. Anything further from council on that topic? Again, this one's just regard to the change in salaries and benefits in the general fund. Okay, moving on. Joanne, I believe you see the question. It's very similar. What's essentially the same deconstruction, if you will, for the special revenue funds. So this would be public safety, public service, and the parks special revenue fund.
So we could kind of look at these. So the 2400, that's your public safety fund. Majority of that is coming from the new position that was requested there. And then we also have the increases related to the FOP agreement, and then again, the changes net to insurance based on those multiple factors that kind of go into those insurance changes. Moving down to the Parks and Recreation, we have some changes for added positions. You'll see an adjustment in there. So this was another one that is going to require a little bit of work. So for 2022, you'll recall when we had the original presentation, we had talked about the fact that seasonal hiring has been quite challenging. So we had an original budget for the seasonal employees that in the part-time budget line that was set at what we were expecting. We weren't able to hire the number of employees that we chose to, so there was a budget adjustment for 2022, reducing those part-time accounts. So just trying to track down, once those reductions were made, kind of the other side of the entry. And then, so that adjustment isn't actually an increase for 2023. It's actually a decrease to the 2022. So that's one of those other kind of ones where we made some changes during the year when we weren't able to fill positions and bring those seasonal staff on. So that looks a little...
Being added back for 2023 is essentially
Correct.
How it feeds through? Okay.
Right. As we had discussed, we're hoping we could bring those seasonal levels back up to par with potential increases that we've requested.
I'm just trying to reconcile in my head. I hear decrease and I see a positive number, so.
I know, that's the kind of the tricky one was like, well, we actually didn't increase 23, we actually decreased 2022. So I wasn't exactly sure how to show it, so that's why it's just in there as an adjustment item.
Understood.
It's not really adding anything, just kind of getting us back hopefully to where we want to be with those seasonal employees. The other one is the steelworkers, which is we don't have many steelworkers going through the special revenue funds. The majority of those are in the general fund or in other funds when it comes to equipment operators and such. So the biggest change you'll see there is the addition of some new positions, and then again, that catch-all, which is partially in this case part of the unclassified increase. I didn't get that far when I ran this, so that catch-all there that says all other would include also the unclassified increase. On the public service side, We do have a big decrease in net insurance, and this should actually be, it's all related to engineering. So this is another one where we changed allocations based on the split of the public service from engineering. So within the public service fund, all of engineering is funded through there. So we had some allocation changes and some other items. So you'll see a net decrease in insurance that's based on those factors that we previously discussed. We have some new additions. We have part of the organizational changes running through here. When you look, you'll see that there is a change in allocation to place a portion of those salaries and benefits within each of the departments that's being supported by those positions. So a portion of the operations, Senior Director of Operations runs through the Public Service Fund. And then again, that catch-all, which is a part of the unclassified increase, but may contain some others. That's a part that I need to get a little more detailed in, getting that breakout a little bit better. And then just at the bottom is the related increase for the pension costs for the FOP increases. Wasn't asked for, but it sits in its own special fund. So just to show the total increase of that contract.
I think you mentioned that in your presentation last week, right?
Correct.
Okay. Anything from council with regard to just the year-over-year changes in salaries and benefits from the special revenue funds?
Just,
Ms. Bowers.
thank you. Just to clarify, so the, when I'm looking at the special funds, so the add ADD line, those are new positions that are being added.
Correct.
So about $100,000 for new public safety, $196,000 for new parks staff. And then I guess this is where I got a little confused. So new public service new, only 19,000. So is that?
It's a percentage. So basically taking each of those positions and then they got allocated to each of the areas that they served. So since the Director of Operational Services also supports the engineering department, a portion of those salaries and benefits were allocated to this fund also.
Would that specific position, the Senior Director of Operations, be under the new org, or under the add
New
number?
org. I broke those out separately since it was a separate request within the,
Got it.
because it talked about additions, new org, negotiated increases in the compensation plan. So I kept them separate based on how the request was presented.
So the general fund number, the 254,000 for reorganization, we would add the 28 to that for a total cost of the proposed reorganization?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this all includes benefits also, by the way.
Yep, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I got it, yeah, thank you.
On that topic of that particular position, again, just to help kind of maybe connect the dots, that's reflected on page 10, right? And it has I think there's 4 individual departments that flow up to that particular position: engineering, public service, planning, and parks.
Correct.
So that would be 3/4 paid from special revenues and 1/4 from the GF?
I'd have to look and see how it's broken out, but I know there are 25%, yeah, it's 25% for you, but I
But the
think
new wouldn't go into the reorg.
20, I believe.
The new
Yeah.
allocations doesn't go into the reorg. So it would only be the reorg line that would go into the reorg. So I'm assuming that these are true new positions then.
This one is.
She's counting that as a reorg. I guess what we're sidebarring about is that the Senior Director of Operational Services, you've treated for your numbers as new org, new ORG. You've not treated that as an add, as an additional position in your numbers.
Correct.
Does that follow? Okay.
Got it.
Thank you.
Anything from council with regard to the special revenue funds, salaries and benefits? Okay, thank you so much. Moving on to the next category is human resources. I'll just read the question. Could you please provide a more thorough explanation for the need for the senior deputy director role, its purpose, and the overall restructuring of the leadership team? reference pages. Again, page 10 seems to be a popular one this evening, as well as page 34.
That would be me, Mr. Chair.
All right, Madam Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So from the time I took office, I said that I would be committed to always looking at how we can streamline our operations, improve the efficiencies of our operations. Thank you, Kevin. Is that the chart on page 10? Thank you. Which is chart on page 10 that was just referenced by Councilman Schnetzer. Thank you. So the request for the senior deputy director and the other position, 2 positions that were referenced tonight, is an effort to streamline the reporting that we have within the city, streamline the oversight and management that we have of the various departments. And it is part of the ongoing evaluation of staffing and operations that we are doing as we continue to seek to elevate not only the level of services that we provide to our residents, but the manner in which we are doing so. We've already heard tonight of a few of the efforts that we're taking in terms of efficiencies of operations, from changing how we're rating our street programs, which will save not only staff time, but also improve our consistency with how streets are rated, updating codes to align with the Ohio revised codes, et cetera. Staffing obviously is one of those things as well. From an organizational perspective, the first step that I took to really try to align those operations and to improve basically streamline how we're reporting was the creation or establishment of the Director of Administrative Services position, which took place back in 2021. Rather than create a new position and hire from the outside, I utilized an existing staff member who had demonstrated the capacity and the skill to perform at a higher level and assume some additional responsibilities. And I promoted a staff member into that position. That was Director Vollmer, who was the Director of HR. She still is the Director of HR, but she also has the title of Director of Administrative Services. She's still responsible for the oversight of the HR department, but also as the Director of Administrative Services, also is responsible for the oversight of IT and finance as well. That ability to have one person overseeing those 3 departments has proved to be extremely beneficial because we've been able to identify areas of overlap in our operations, redundancy that we have in processes, identifying processes that we need to have in place. It's allowed us opportunity to streamline job functions and to really better utilize the staff that we have amongst all 3 of those departments, where we had one employee in one department who didn't have enough to do. We had another employee in another department who had too much to do, and we were able to reshuffle those job duties because those job functions in those administrative departments of HR, IT, and finance are all very much interrelated. As we have continued to add more projects to our workload, that position also has assumed responsibility for the strategic plan, the oversight of that, and will be assuming responsibility in 2023 for new initiatives that we have that are citywide initiatives, such as our DEI program, which will be both internal and external, as well as developing a new safety program, which we vastly and critically need within the city, and then also taking over the responsibility for our risk management, because that is an area of opportunity for us where we really have identified a need for us to go through and evaluate how we have been handling our insurance, how we've been handling our claims, and making sure that we are being most cost effective in the way that we are doing that. Similarly, with the continued growth of projects, I now seek to do the same thing for the external-facing departments, our operational departments, that we did for the administrative internal-facing departments. That is the external departments being planning, parks and recreation, public service, and engineering. That senior director of operations would provide oversight to those 4 external-facing departments, just the same way that the Director of Administrative Services has been doing that on the internal-facing departments. The senior DOS, so I don't have to keep saying that long title, would provide oversight to the external departments, same way, looking at the processes, looking at the workflow between departments, communication between departments, identifying where we have redundancy, identify where we have shared platforms that we are not utilizing to our full effectiveness, how we are utilizing our staff. That position also will have responsibility and oversight for high-level projects, including management of the capital improvements project, management of our facilities project that we are doing, and of course our asset management project that we have undertaken this year and will be rolling out fully within the next full months. And to answer Councilwoman Angelou's position, that position would go to Mr. Schultz, because I think he has demonstrated throughout this past year his ability to operate at a much higher level than his position is. He's already performing at the level of a senior director. He should be in that position. And quite frankly, with the CIP and the facilities project coming underway, he's going to have a lot on his plate. But the ability to provide that macro oversight will be critical. The senior deputy director will support both the senior DAS and the senior DOS, and really will provide citywide support wherever needed. And while the senior directors will be providing that oversight at a macro level, the senior deputy director will be more what I would say at the micro level, making sure that we have the correct city policies in place that are necessary for efficient operations, looking at our procurement practices. We just adopted a new procurement policy that was really spurred on by COVID, but now what are the practices that we need to follow internally with regard to that policy? Doing a continuous reevaluation of our staffing needs. We no longer are sitting down with the directors going, okay, what staff do you need next year? We are looking at 5-year staffing projections so that we can plan out accordingly, and we're not just putting things in the budget to put them in the budget, but we are being strategic in the requests that we are bringing forward to you. Looking at our waste reduction opportunities, looking at inventory control, grants and grant compliance. We've talked repeatedly within these chambers about the opportunity and the need to pursue outside funding, having somebody to actually provide oversight to that and to be able to help with that. And that applies to multiple departments across the city, everybody from public safety to parks and recreation to engineering to public service. Those need to look for outside funding opportunities. The deputy director position really would have the ability to flex based on priorities. We all know that sometimes projects develop that we hadn't anticipated or we hadn't foreseen, but being able to shift priorities and flex to those needs will be one of the functions of this role. And we already have somebody on staff who has demonstrated the skill set and the experience to be able to perform at that level. He currently has a list of over 100 items of opportunities for us to explore, and that would be our current finance director, Corey Weibensinger, who would move into that role to support both the senior DAS and senior DOS. As I mentioned, with the new structure, we'd be streamlining the oversight and management of the work that we're charged with. We no longer are operating the way that we were 10, 15, 20 years ago, and quite frankly, in many ways, we're not even operating the way we were 3 years ago. COVID changed a lot of that with our post-COVID operations and what we need to do, but also the amount of projects that we now have on everyone's plates here as a result of Issue 12 has significantly changed how we need to operate going forward. We now have that dedicated funding stream, and I've said it before, that in and of itself mandates a higher level of responsibility and accountability to our taxpayers to make sure that those dollars are being invested wisely, that when we have a project, we are following through on that project in a timely manner, that our vendors are being held accountable to what they're doing. But every time we add a project, it needs oversight. And so the reason for this organizational change is to, again, heighten that level of oversight that we have within the city to provide consistency as we move forward, again, heightened level of accountability and transparency. We also, for many, many years, when we did not have a dedicated funding stream, we were doing what we needed to do to maintain the status quo. We were keeping the lights open and the doors, lights on and the doors open, there we go. But now we have a duty and responsibility to be proactive in what we're doing and making sure that we are looking to enhance the essential services that we're providing, and we need to be prepared for that. This organizational structure, I believe, sets us up for that in 2023 as we move forward. It will be something that we continually look at and evaluate as we move forward. Every time we have a position that changes, we look to how we're operating and what we need to do. But I believe that this organizational structure will set us up for success going forward. That's a long-winded explanation, but I wanted to cover all the bases in that. So.
Yeah, I know, it's like we untangled the web there a little bit. Anything from council on that? I guess it's fair game to, any question about page 10 at this point? Mm-hmm. Anything from council?
That was pretty special.
Okay.
Well, I guess let me ask.
Yeah, sure, Ms. Bowers.
I appreciate a lot of what you said, Mayor, and I think that you touched on some really important points, particularly, you know, kind of streamlining processes, having some continuity on grants and grant compliance. I just wonder, did you explore, grant analyst or different levels of positions in order to accomplish the things? And so why are we creating higher level positions versus, and I'm not saying that this is irrespective of the people that are filling these roles, because I would completely agree that Mr. Schultz and Mr. Weibensinger have really demonstrated a lot of value, certainly to our community. So irrespective of that.
And I threw the grants out as an example of one of over 100 initiatives here. So I don't in any way mean to imply that Mr. Weibensinger is now going to be our grants writer for everything. I suspect that we will, maybe in the short term, but I suspect going forward we will be looking at a grants analyst. And I know I have money in my budget and professional services to look for an outside consultant to help with grant writing, because that in and of itself is a time-consuming function. But the need to have the ability, or the need to have the ability to be able to look at how we are operating internally with all of our processes and our policies. Do we have the right policies in place? Do we have, how are our departments spending their dollars? How are our departments utilizing their staff? Looking at our code changes, all of those things that need to align so that we are improving our efficiencies of operation. There's so much work to do. It has to be spread out, and it has to be at a higher level to be able to provide that oversight and management and direction to the rest of the departments, because the department directors are running their own departments. They've got their own staff, their own projects within their departments, but having that umbrella so that we are taking a unified approach, it has become critical. And quite frankly, as we've gone through the CIP development, we've uncovered, it's been like an onion as we continue to peel back layers and identifying things that we should be doing that we're not. That's not to say that what we're doing is wrong. We're doing fine, but that doesn't mean we can't be doing better. And to have somebody in those positions to be able to see from a higher level looking down across those departments to see the unifying thread through them, I think is critical.
Anything further from council?
If I may. So I think I'm having a hard time with the senior deputy director where it's placed, and I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. Is everyone underneath that going to be reporting up to them, or is it just in that spot because it's going to be kind of a branch of both of those?
It's in that spot because it'll be a branch of both of those.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that was
And really
correct.
supporting both of the senior directors and working with all of the departments.
Okay, thank you.
I know that org chart's a little wonky, I know.
It makes sense when you say it. I just wanted to clarify it.
Anything further from council? All right, thank you for the explanation.
Thank you.
So the last item that we have prepared is with regard to the Department of Public Safety. There was a question asked about essentially the necessity behind the mental health clinician ask that's in the budget, whether or not this would be a classified or unclassified position, and then any details of the cost-sharing arrangement that's outlined in the budget with, I believe it is Mifflin Township. And for reference, I believe those topics are discussed on pages 35 and 91 in the budget book. I see you came prepared, Chief.
Good evening, Council. I'll direct your attention to the display. First, to answer the question, it would be an unclassified position within the city's structure. The purpose is really to address a growing need in Gahanna, but really across the country, and it's really come to the forefront post-COVID, where we used to have a lot of support services in the mental health arena. So whether it be Children's Services, Office of Aging, net care, clinicians in the field, all of those have essentially retracted. Those experienced clinicians have gone into either a hospital setting or a primary care facility like a Columbus Springs or other internal in an internal setting. So there's not that availability of field personnel. Just this month, net care is going to cease all of their intake operations, which means when we run across somebody in crisis, we're going to have to transport them either to Ohio State, University Hospital for intake, or if they're a juvenile, through the Behavioral Pavilion at Children's Hospital. All of that takes time. As an example, you can see in the top left corner, these are our mental health runs for 2020, 2021, and then year-to-date 2022. Just as an example, if you look on page 94 of the budget book, you will see our average cost per call for service detailed for 2020, 2021, and for 2022 it's pending. But in 2020, those 725 calls for service, those mental health runs, represent $291,203 of the city's funds that were dedicated for an officer response. While we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of training dollars related to making sure our officers are CIT trained, making sure that they have those crisis intervention skills. They're not clinicians. They're not licensed clinicians. They don't have those contacts. So this is really designed to provide continuity of operations. It's designed to provide those outreaches and really provide a triage initially, but also some. I want to be careful saying that we're not going to get into the treatment business, but we're really designed to provide connections between those services, making sure that there is continuity from a standpoint of when an officer responds to that call on first shift and it's someone in crisis, that there is follow through. What we're seeing, especially in Franklin County, there is the rapid response emergency addiction and crisis teams that are in use by the city of Columbus. That's marrying up Columbus Fire, Columbus PD, and mental health clinicians, and they respond to these mental health calls. What we're trying ultimately to do is replicate that locally. We have our community liaison officer. It's a very new position. Really, we were able to deploy Officer Kelly Moffitt in May, so we're getting our legs underneath us. We also have a community paramedic, and that's where we're kind of getting into the discussions with Mifflin Township, community paramedic program. We are lacking that trained clinician, and that's what this is ultimately designed to do. We spend a lot of hourly commitments on these. These are very long standing. It's not respond to the call, take a quick report, and move on. Oftentimes, it involves hours and hours and hours, especially if there's a hospitalization or further treatment that's needed. The cost sharing, those discussions are between me and the fire chief. The initial ask was $40,000 over 3 years. The remainder paid by the city. In fact, we're looking for someone with not only the credentialing as a licensed social worker, but also to have some degree of experience in preferably in the field. So about 5 years of experience would be ideal. Salary and benefits, that's going to be a little bit north of $80,000, around $85,000. So that splits about 40-some% of total cost with Mifflin Township. Obviously, that's making its way through their budgetary process. We don't have any firm commitments, again, because I think we're running our budgetary process in tandem. That's really our goal and our vision for this position. Hopefully that answers the question. If you have any questions regarding those numbers up there, please let me know.
Thank you, Chief, and definitely appreciate the data visual up there. Anything from council on this particular topic? Mrs. McGregor and then Mrs. Padova.
So you have one person, if they work 8 to 5 and that leaves, more time, what's the plan on how they would be staffed?
Well, yeah, obviously those, we're a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation, so those calls continue to come in. We're not trying to this person wouldn't be responding on every call. But what it will be able to do is provide some continuity on the back end. We do follow-ups on for example, we do follow-up on every overdose call that we run on. We make contact with the victim's family, and then we provide some resources. So that would be one example of where that clinician would be in that follow-up process. I do envision that as we continue to work on the staffing model, that there will be some direct responses. Obviously, the 988 number has rolled out. That's rolled out nationwide. That's a crisis and addiction number similar to 911. Unfortunately, with that rollout, there's not a lot of infrastructure at the local level to provide a response other than a uniformed police officer. So what I would say is we're going to continue to work on what that best response model looks like. But a lot of this is going to be triage, follow-up, and providing some consistency potentially after the call, but also giving support to those officers. We have a lot of, I will say, chronic conditions, a lot of people in chronic crisis in Gahanna. A first shift officer may respond, another officer is not familiar with that location will respond in a couple of days. It's trying to bring consistency and follow-up and also bring those community support programs to bear. Clinicians have a lot more success than police officers do a lot of times in reaching out to those community-based providers. So that's other avenue we're hoping will improve our service delivery.
That answer your question, Nancy? Mrs. Padova?
Do you feel, I guess, I don't know how to phrase it, do you feel confident that Mifflin will approve this, and/or if they don't, would we still move forward with it? It would just, the price would increase a little bit.
So again, the request was through the fire chief, Chief Cowser. We've had, again, it's working its way through their processes as well. If they ultimately, don't approve that, what I think will be the next step is to reapproach the administration post passage of the budget and potentially ask for a supplemental if it's of value.
Anything further from council on this?
I could just make a comment. Or no?
I have a couple of questions. All right. So again, thank you, Chief. I do have a question. It's somewhat related to this. How would you what would you estimate is quote unquote fully staffed from a sworn officer perspective? Now, I know you have maternity leave and workers' comp situation and stuff like that, but just within and we also have escalating. You mentioned the juvenile vehicular thefts, so that may be a bit of a moving target, I guess. So not to pin you down on any particular number, but in best guess right now, what is fully staffed with regard to your sworn staff?
Very hard to answer at this point. Annually, we do a staffing analysis. We're a little bit behind in completing that analysis for this year. We run that a September to September timeframe so that we capture data in a little different window. What I would say is this is a very unique year for us. We've added positions, and due to the academy training, the lengthy in-house field training program, we haven't quite realized any of those positions yet. We have 4 officers that are going through field training. They are gradually coming out. In fact, I just saw my phone some releases to solo patrol. So those will come on here over the next few weeks. We also have an individual in the academy. We have 2 other positions to fill. So we're gradually catching up to a backlog of many vacancies. So I don't think I could provide you a good ideal number right now because we just haven't realized. We essentially have an entire shift of officers in training that are going to be deployed over the next few months. And that's going to significantly impact and hopefully one, reduce our overtime, but also it's going to impact our response. So I guess to be determined would be the best answer. I know that's not complete, but
I'm wondering if I might twist your arm a little bit. Do you feel like you're fully staffed now?
On any given day, I don't think we're ever fully staffed.
Okay. So the basis for the question is I was going to ask, would this position be kind of in addition to what you view as fully staffed, or would this be in lieu of adding another sworn officer?
This would be in lieu of adding another sworn, but what it does do is it takes those officers away from, it allows the officers, a sworn police officer essentially has arrest powers. That's what we, the value of a police officer is the power of arrest. I mean, not to make it in simplest terms, but that's the value of being a sworn peace officer. While these are very critical calls and do require a police response because there's an element of public safety and potential risk to life and property, the best person to respond may not be a police officer, and it saves time. All of those numbers in terms of hours that officers are spending, if that can be cut down just a fraction by that licensed clinician that provides a better response, those are hours of productivity that can be better directed toward traffic mitigation strategies, speed in the neighborhoods, crime reduction in other areas of the city, retail theft, deterring motor vehicle theft, all the things that we've talked about at length that really impact our city. So those are hours that clinician can take away from those sworn officers that can go be directed, better use of their time, and really better use of that clinician's time and better service to the public.
Sure. So thank you for that. And I'll just add a comment, not a question. I think while it's obviously very difficult to put a price tag on sort of life-saving care that this position would be intended to fulfill or administer, in the cold, hard world of sort of budgetary figures, the fact that you're saying this is in lieu of a sworn police officer, I think it simply makes economic sense. And so thank you for bringing it forward. Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schnetzer. I wanted to just echo Mr. Schnetzer's comments. I think this is very forward-thinking, and I applaud you, Chief, for working with Chief Gauser on bringing this forward. We had the opportunity to attend a forum regarding the rapid response team that Columbus has been working on implementing, and I'm just excited to see that we're addressing a holistic community health in this way and supporting our sworn officers through a strategic deployment of staff. So thank you, Chief.
Anything from council? Going once, going twice? Okay. Before I conclude finance, I guess I'll just ask the question if there's an appetite to have a committee meeting after our regular session of council next week, or if we feel like we need a couple of weeks to wrap our heads around the document and submit more questions. Is there anybody on council thinking that next week is appropriate, or we want to wait a full 2 weeks to come back?
I was just reviewing, my preference, I was just reviewing the tentative schedule, and I think that our first public hearing is set for next week on the 21st, with the second public hearing on the 5th. For me, I was thinking that we would have the opportunity to have maybe a short committee meeting next time.
I'm certainly happy to facilitate, just asking if there's an appetite for it. I know sometimes, there's competing schedule conflicts and stuff like that, and, while we've been in these chambers before, a lot of late nights, I don't know what the appetite is for council, but I'm certainly happy to facilitate, so I'm hearing at least one. I'm seeing a few heads nodding as well.
I'd rather front-load it than back-load
Okay,
it.
all right. Then Jeremy, we'll get it on the calendar for next week. After regular meeting, we'll have a finance committee, okay?
If there's no questions, if no questions are sent to you, then we just don't have a meeting.
Are we flexible that way, Mr. Van Meter? Okay, all right. All right, thus concludes finance. Thank you, everybody.